Hello everyone, this is Leon. Before we start this tutorial, I wanna say thank you for tuning in. And if you like my video, please consider giving it a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. I hope you find my tutorial useful. And if you do, please leave a comment down below and let me know. First is to print out the template onto the papers. The template link is in the description down below. Please feel free to check it out. Next, cut along the dash line and connect them with a tape. After that, I normally will stick the template onto harder cardstock because I keep all my templates. And by doing so, the template can last longer than my past relationship. After that, cut out only the sword part. Then make 2 copies on 1 cm foam. Now remove the inner part of the template. And please note that this is not the blade part but the inner part. On the template, I use red dash line to indicate it. This design is to give the Greatsword has a thick body but hollow structure like my heart, to reduce the weight. Now make 4 copies of them on 1 cm foam and 2 copies on 5 mm foam. After that, let's do a surgery on the 5 mm foam. I cut a V-groove at the tip on both ends of the both sides, and then insert a wooden skewer into it. Then use contact adhesive to attach the other side. To use a contact adhesive, you have to apply onto both sides of the foam and then let it dry for a few minutes. By doing this, will greatly enhance the tip from getting damaged easily. After that, attach the rest of 1 cm foam on both sides evenly. As you can see, I also added wooden skewer onto the other tip. Repeat the same steps and attach the rest of the foam with contact adhesive. After that, bring back the main sword piece and mark the attachment line. Use contact adhesive again to attach the pieces. Please remember that contact adhesive is bad for your lungs, so only use it in well-ventilated area or put on a respirator when using it. And the reason I use contact adhesive is because it has more working time and cover a larger area. Next, let's work on the inner structure. I use an 1-inch aluminium tube because it is more lightweight and sturdier than the PVC pipe. I haven't been using PVC pipe for a while now because it is wobbly and heavier. If you look at the template, you will notice I have 2 structure positions, all thanks to the hole at the sword, so I couldn't extend the handle structure towards the tip. At first, I tried to use a 1-inch aluminium tube for the bottom structure, but it is harder to bend, so I decided to replace it to a 2 cm aluminium tube. I measured the length and then cut it with a pipe cutter. After that, mark the bending positions and bend the aluminium with brute force. It might take a few tries to get the best shape, so remember, do not over bend it. As you can see here, I did it back and forth just to make sure I got the right shape. So sometimes violence is the answer. Once we got the structure ready, now let's move back to the foam part. I cut this piece of foam and attach it to this end. Next, I have my friend to help me laser cut a bunch of these support pieces on 1 cm foam because I'm lazy. This will be used for holding the aluminium in place. Now bring back the template and you will see all the marking. Mark them onto the sword and slot the aluminium in. And now I realize that since I have my friend to laser cut this for me before I even started the build, or even before the universe was formed, so the hole was meant for 1-inch aluminium. But worry not, just a few straps of 3 mm foam is going to save my day, because 2 cm plus 3 mm plus 3 mm equal to 96 mm, which is slightly bigger than 1 inch 25 mm. This will give it enough holding power to keep it in place. Damn, I'm good at math. Thank God I'm Asian. Next, I use steel epoxy to attach the straps onto the 4 sides of the aluminium. Now slot into the foam support pieces and glue them in place. For the front part, I also make a smaller one to hold the aluminium in place. Lastly, I use steel epoxy to fix the aluminium in place because super glue doesn't work well on metal. Next, use this piece of template, make 2 copies on 5 mm foam. I extended it slightly and use super glue to attach it on. I started with one end on the right on the tip and ended with an extended end. And then start another piece on the other side towards the first piece, so you don't have to trim it to exact size. After that, it is time to seal the sword with another piece with contact adhesive. You can also place a few pieces of paper underneath the foam. This will help with attaching the foam. After that, start marking the sanding line. Use the previous template and cut along the blade line. Mark them onto the blade, and then use a knife to remove most of the material first. And here is why I use 2 pieces of 5 mm foam in the middle, so the attachment line can be a center reference. Now bring it to sand. I recommend using a belt sander for larger surface sanding, but I got unlucky and my belt sander broke. So in the end I can only use my finger to scratch the foam and then use my tongue to smoothen it. Just kidding, I use my drill and a sanding bit to remove most of the material first, then use a random orbital sander to smoothen the surface. And here I use a same sanding bit to cut the sword surface to give it a bitten look. You can also use angle grinder, but it is much more dangerous and I don't like using angle grinder. After that, I switch to this pointy sanding bit to cut smaller details. Lastly, use this stone bit to do smoother details. After hours of sanding, it shall look like this. Now let's proceed to the handle. Make one copy with this template on 5mm foam, and then round it first. After that, slot it into the aluminium tube. It might be a little tight like she said, so using a heat gun will help soften the foam and make it easier to slot it in. I also use a rough sandpaper to smoothen the glue crystal, and then use a super glue to fix it in place. Now let's move on to this I don't know how to code it part. Make one copy each on 5mm foam. One thing to take note is, the part that connecting the circle and the circle has to do slanted cut. Next, connect these two pieces first. Then I try my best to check any available source to see what the detail could look like. Then I sketch them onto a paper and trace them onto the foam. After that, round it first and then attach the circle. Lastly, use a knife and make shallow cuts followed by the line. After that, also add the strap with 2mm foam on both ends. Now it is time for the magic. Use a heat gun to heat the surface to open up the cuts and make it more visible. Now move on to the handle tip, just follow the template and you will get it there. Same like the other thing, the circle also has to do slanted cut. And don't forget to add a 1cm strap with 2mm foam. Now the foam parts are done, using a heat gun to heat all the foam. This will seal the foam surface and make it more smoother. After heating the foam, then proceed to prime it. You can prime it with either PVA glue or white glue for a budget way. While waiting for the primer to dry, let's proceed to do the leather part. I first mark the leather part so I won't get confused like my future. I first make copies on the black leather parts, then I trace it the way that both sides are connected in one piece. That's because leather can be a little bit stretchy and I don't want any seams line. And as you can see, I also manually extended the edge about an inch because the leather will be folded in. After that, make copies on 5mm foam and connect both pieces with super glue. Then use contact adhesive to cover the leather onto the foam. For attaching, always start with the middle first, then slowly cover one side. After that, move on to the other side. After the surface is covered, use a scissor to cut some of the curved part so it can be folded in. After that, I redo this because I realized there are some parts that I missed out. I manually draw a line onto the template and then make one copy on a 3mm foam. Attach it onto the foam piece. This will elevate the edge like the sword in game. Then for the other side, I use a 1cm half double foam and stick it onto 2mm foam and cut it out. After that, I attach it onto this piece. This will elevate it and gives it more details. Next, just repeat the leather part again. I also use a plastic thing to push the cover in. Now comparing this to this, it definitely looks much better. Back to the template again, remove this and make one copy on the black leather, and add some extra allowance to the edge. I also make some cuts on the allowance so it can be folded in. Then use a contact adhesive to stick it. Then I mark the sewing line, then use the needle to poke hole with 1cm gap. Then I started to sew the thread with a cotton thread. To be honest, this is my first time ever threading a leather like this. So it actually took me a few pieces for me to finally get a hang of it. It's not perfect on my first try, but it does the job. Next, I attach this onto it with contact adhesive. Now move on to the smaller piece, using the same method but with 3mm foam. Then I also manually draw the line, like how she draw a line between us, make copies on 2mm foam, and attach it on like this. Next, we'll be cover it with a brown leather. Fast forward to this piece, I'm using a 5mm base and 3mm for the edge. After all the leather parts are done, for now, I'm starting to thread all the leathers. At this moment, I'm still manually mark the threading line on the template first, then trace it onto the part. Mark it with 1cm gap, and here I'm more confident to show you how to thread it. First, poke the needle from the surface and go all the way in. Then hook the bottom thread and pull it out. Now insert the surface thread and pull the under thread. For a better result, pull it all the way in so the knot will be hidden. When it is done, it should look like this. And now, continue to make the other parts. I use 3mm for this part because it will be folded afterwards. And again, I manually draw the line and attach the strap on. For this strap, I use 3mm foam. At the same time, I also made this with 2mm base and 2mm strap. However, I also realized it is a little bit short, so I extended the both ends. After covering with the leather, it is time to thread it again. As before, I marked the 1cm gap, then I use a cotton thread, folded in half, and extended it about 80% more, and use this leather needle to do the threading. For starting, poke into the first hole, hook on the thread, and pull it up, but do not pull all the way up. Now take one thread from below, wrap around the starting edge, and insert into the thread hole. Now pull the bottom thread, and pull it all the way in so the knot can be hidden below. Now repeat the same step until the end. For the ending, also pretty simple, just tie the knot and super glue it. And now all the leather parts are done, I think. Now let's do the buckle and button. Simply make 2 copies of each of these on 5mm foam will do. I also mark one side of the edge because it will have to be round off afterwards. For the buttons, use 5mm as the base and then 2mm for the details on top. Oh, and I also made these little ring bits with 5mm foam. After sanding them, use a heat gun to heat seal the surface before painting them. At the same time, also heat the buttons, front and back. After that, use fingers to push it from the back, to give it a little bit curve. When it is done, then it is ready to prime and paint. Now that the sword is primed, then I painted dark silver onto the body and bright silver onto the blade. Now ain't it a beauty? But it's not done yet because next we will add in some weathering and make it looks even better. Let's get ready the color palette, different shades of brown, especially liquid text, heavy body rose, sienna and Mars black. And to save my acrylic paint, I just happen to have this water-based brown paint left over from previous project. And this will be the colors we will be using for adding shades and texture onto the sword. I first water down the brown paint and then do a quick cover over the sword body. Then I use a non-woven kitchen towel to wipe off the excess. This will wipe off most of the color and leave some into the gap, which is what we want. It is also adding different shades onto the sword body. Remember, all we want to paint is just the sword body, so do not paint the blade. Because what we are recreating was an oxidized and beaten sword body, but a sharpened blade that is still fighting, unlike my dream. However, I also use the wet kitchen towel with some watered down paint, give the blade a light wipe so the blade doesn't feel lonely. Also not to forget about the top part or it might feel lonely too. Now move on to the second shade. I add in a little bit of black to darken it. This will give another darker shade, and this time wipe only the flat surface of the sword body, because we want the darker color paint lives inside the dent. I also did some weathering onto this foam girlfriend, the tube thingy, so it will look used. After that, I added more darker shades into the dent. Lastly, after everything is dry, use another clean kitchen towel, give the surface another wipe. This will remove some of the brown paint, give the surface buff and reveal the bottom silver layer. After painting everything, slot this in and fix them in place with a super glue. Next, I cut a 3cm leather strap, use a double-sided tape and wrap the straps onto the handle. When it comes to the ending, I manually trim it to a pointy end and also use a super glue to fix it in place. Then I also use double-sided tape on the leather strap and wrap around this part. And I also did the same thing with the brown leather straps. After that, I cut a bunch of leather straps from the scrap leather, tie the knot, and trim the ends. And this will be used for the accessories on the sword. Now come back to the sword again. I use the same method as double-sided tape on leather and wrap around the handle. After that, I also use double-sided tape to tape the leather onto this part. The good thing about using double-sided tape is, you can adjust it a few times without worrying damaging the surface, unless you use a super strong double-sided tape. After tapping a few pieces and make sure it is enough to cover it, then put on this piece of leather first. Then attach these pieces together with super glue. I'll start by aligning these two pieces and then attach them with super glue. Then attach these long pieces onto it. I folded one side in like how it looks like in the game, and then glue it with super glue. Then flip over onto the other side and glue it. Then for the other side, also fold it in and glue it. Now here I'm really glad I extended it previously, so it fits nicely. Lastly, attach this small piece on. Oh, and I kinda forgot about this hole, so I bring back the template, trace it on, and then cut them with a razor knife. Next, attach all the leather parts onto the sword. Based on the design, the top black leather will be at the bottom, so I recommend attaching the center first, as in the top part of the sword, to get the middle point right before attaching both sides. Because I also made mistake, I attached one side first and the other side end up shortened. Now I use measurement tape and measure the length for the belt, and made a set of the templates. Just like the other leather, I also wrap this onto a 2mm foam, so it will look more solid. Slot them in and make sure the lengths are correct. Now add in the remaining belts using the same 2mm foam, and then wrap them with the corresponding leather. However, for this belt, I did not wrap them, but instead I sandwiched the leather onto both sides of the foam. I also made this smaller 1cm belt loop but only attached the leather onto one side. After that, I used sewing machine to sew the edge of the strap to give it more additional details. Now that all the leathers are ready, we can finally attach them onto the sword. Now slot them in and then fix it in place with the super glue. And don't forget about this as well. I also made these foam buttons because I couldn't find a similar one in store. Just cut a bunch of round foam, round the edges, and then paint them gold. Then just simply fix them in place with a super glue will do. After that, attach the buckle onto the belt like this, and this will be slot into this part. Attach the other one onto the black belt, and it will be placed here. Now attach this one here, and slot the end into the other buckle. Then mark a cutting hole, cut a hole with a razor knife. I also mark another 2 more holes here, and this time I try poking the hole with this hole puncher. I also made this tiny pin and trim it slightly shorter, slot it into this hole and fix it in place. Lastly, we'll be attaching the belt loop, and then fix everything in place. And now everything has come together and we are almost there. Next, I attach this button onto the bottom later. Lastly, we'll be attaching the strings. I use a ruler to measure and mark the hole and string line in positions. Then try to use the needle to poke hole. Then I realized it's too hard like what she said, so I decided to use the power of technology and drill holes onto the marking. Next, I use a cotton string and trim it to length, and then insert the strings into it. And now we got 11, 10, 9, 2, if you know you know. Lastly, we'll be attaching the accessories onto here. I simply glue it underneath the straps and try to hide the end. And for the other one, I cut another smaller straps, slot under the straps, and then glue the accessories onto it. Now that every piece is finally attached, lastly we'll be painting this black part. Attach this forgotten button. And paint the cyan strap with the metallic cyan. I printed another piece of the template and make marking with it. And then use a masking tape to mask the outer side to get a more precise paint job. After that, paint a few layers onto it so it can be more even. Oh, and I also realized these pieces are actually this color, so I painted them as well. One is done, remove the masking tape. And lastly, weather the leather like how we did to the sword. Additionally, you can also use sandpaper to roughen the leather surface so it will look more used. And now it is done.